Hello and welcome. Just going to give it 30 seconds or so for people to join. Sort my screen out. People are still joining. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Third one in about, I don't know, 2 weeks or something, 3 weeks. Check us out, hey? Just waiting for the last few to enter. We'll give it 20 seconds. Hope everyone's well, enjoying the non-football and about everyone else, but I quite enjoyed the first sort of 7 days, enjoyed the first weekend, got to spend some time with the family. It's quite nice, but I'm ready for football now, club football certainly to come back. And that game against City is quite exciting, isn't it? Um, so yes. Right, okay, I think we're good to go. Normal rules apply. We've got our Q&A function, so please do ask questions. And if you want to raise your hand and come in like a bit of a radio style phone in, then please do as well. It's always nice to hear questions from members directly as well. So thanks for coming. Thanks for attending. We'll bring Rob in about 5 or so minutes. We're just going to cover some AST business. Tim, you here? So I look very disorganized, don't I? Because I've just, I mean, can I say what I've been doing today? Because it's a weird moment. So I've actually been in Stoke, sunny Stoke, which is always raining when I go. And obviously, 5, 6 years ago, we had the rivalry with Stoke. And today I was hosting, I work for an indoor go-karting company, so we were hosting the Stoke team. And obviously Stoke aren't doing very well. They're in the championship. They're at the bottom of the championship, really. So they wanted a bit of a bonding day. So there's a little bit of PR in it for us. And John Walters is their technical director. He's their edu. And of course, he scored a few goals against us. And he also played in the time when they were very rough. So it was a case of when I saw him, all that anger started to come back, but obviously in the professional. But he was also very nice in real life, and we had a great chat about football. He gave me a lot of insight about what they used to say in the Stoke dressing room before playing an Arsene Wenger side. He wasn't there when Aaron Ramsey obviously had his incident, I think, came the season after. So, but it was just fascinating listening to him, and I had to admit to him at the end that I've probably given you a lot of abuse in the past. But anyway, it was just yeah, it was a bit of a surreal moment. It's just funny how these things happen. But anyway, enough about Stoke, more about Arsenal. So, Tim, what's been happening? UEFA, FIFA, what are we updating on?
Well, it's been a pretty busy week for a non-football week. The biggest news of all is football regulator. Let's come to that in a moment. But just very briefly, members who've been around a while will know that one of the things we've done is constantly chip away at UEFA about better treatment for away fans, and especially how fans are treated at the finals. We were perhaps motivated to really get involved in this when we had the ridiculous situation of being sent to Baku. So we've tabled motions as Football Supporters Europe about picking cities that can cope with big finals, and then also campaigning for a bigger allocation to be given to the teams that reach the final. We do this every year, hoping that one year will come a time when Arsenal are in one of the major European finals. And I don't want to in any way jinx a very tough draw that's coming up, but we're at a more exciting stage for a long time. But we are making progress. I think that they've reduced considerably that ballot they used to do, that general sale that I called the Touts Charter in the early spring. And I think we're probably looking at a situation where you'll see up to a third of tickets for the finals in the lower competitions and a much bigger allocation for the final. I don't know. If I were to guess at the moment, I would think maybe mid 20,000s, 25,000 for a Champions League final. Still not enough. But if you think that the last time we had a Champions League final at Wembley, we only had 12,000 tickets awarded to both teams. So we'll keep everybody updated on that. And as Arsenal play more games in Europe, we hope. Go on.
I was just gonna say, I think it's just important to note that these kind of things are things that the AST work on in the background. I know, Tim, you're heavily involved in stuff like this, and it can be quite tedious, can't it? We were away from the Champions League for 6 years in the end, or whatever it was, and yet every year we were still lobbying about this, and it was a little bit like we feel a bit irrelevant here, but we knew that one day it will help. And I think if we had stopped lobbying while we were out of the Champions League and started again now just because we're back in it, probably wouldn't have got anywhere. So I think it's just, fair play to you. And I think there's probably been some dark days in the middle there, but hopefully we're getting there.
Well, it's when you get a breakthrough and then you get knocked out the cup the next day and you think, oh, well, maybe next year. But yeah, that's something to keep an eye on. And I think you'll see AST doing more work with UEFA and the support liaison officers. And actually, we were chatting to the club this week because a bit of a debrief was done on what happened in Lens, where the treatment wasn't really good enough. And Arsenal will probably play even more games in Europe next year with the new format, something we'll cover in another meeting. But really big news this week, finally, the government publishing a bill to introduce a football regulator in Parliament. It will now happen. It's not going to transform the game, but it is a hugely significant change. It's going to introduce a lot of financial protection. That should help clubs like Reading and Bury and Macclesfield. We see so many clubs in the pyramid. It should help with better investigation and monitoring of Premier League rules by having more powers in investigation. And it will give some reserve powers for clubs. One of the things that the AST led on, and I think the government put it into the bill partly on our persistence, is something that will stop clubs relocating home games overseas or to other venues. So they put in protections for the stadium. Some unscrupulous owners sometimes sell off the stadium to make money and leave the club homeless. They're preventing that, but they're also preventing a scenario, I don't know, let me just crystal ball gaze, where an owner of Arsenal might decide, oh, we've got a nice stadium in Los Angeles, let's use that for some Premier League games. Or where Riyadh offers £100 million to a club to take a Premier League game there, and your match day becomes even more complicated. Akil, it's a lot easier to get Stoke than it is to go to Riyadh. Don't know where it's sunnier though. Maybe today it wasn't so bad.
No, it wasn't raining actually in Stoke, just FYI.
There is lots of work to do now on the football regulator. We will work with the FSA, we will work with other supporter groups who will read the small print. I think one thing we might want to do some more work on is trying to make it a requirement that any club that has a license under the football regulator must have some independent non-executive directors, because that's a really good way of getting a check and balance on a club and on its decision making. So watch out for more messages on that. But I would also say to the membership, this really came out of the Super League debacle, and we'll talk to Rob about this. Rob's won journalism awards and written books about the Super League and what happened in football. But this wouldn't have happened without the uprising of outrage from supporters at the Super League proposal, and then the ongoing giving of evidence to the Crouch Review, the ongoing putting pressure on government, members supporting the AST so that we can go to meetings and speak on your behalf. And eventually, we are voters, we are the electorate, we've got the politicians to listen. And it won't solve everything, but it's going to be good that there is going to be an independent statutory regulation of English football. So it's something to almost have a toast of this week, Akil.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite a journey as well. If you think back to that Super League week and all the work, we did. There was lots of press interest. So, we've obviously met with government. You had a Zoom with Boris Johnson, who was PM at the time. We met Keir Starmer. We all the stuff, the Crouch Review, the documents we presented. It's been quite a journey. So I think to get there, I think is a great thing. So we want fans to be involved in their football clubs. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else to cover?
No, I mean, let's bring Rob in now, and we might start off by talking to Rob about both those issues. Because, hello, Rob, do you want to come on?
Yeah, Rob. Welcome to Rob Draper. Hello.
Hello. Hi, guys. Lovely to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you, Rob. I know I've been thinking and talking to you a while about doing this, and I think we're going to cover so many topics today. But before we get into the sort of the meaty subject, which is you've written a piece for us, and I do urge everybody, we put it in a newsletter all to you a couple of hours ago. Have a read through that if you haven't had a chance. It gives some real insight and understanding into Mikel Arteta, the man. But let's cover the two issues that we talked about, because it's a bit of a coincidence that you're on tonight, but we're talking about two issues that you really wrote about over the last year or two. I think you were on the ground in Paris and did a lot of the coverage that partly helped force UEFA to have to do a review of how they staged the final in Paris and what should improve. And then, of course, you were very involved in writing about the football regulator, not least because you were involved in the Neville book, which I think partly charted his role of that kind of first Sky Sports programme where he went after the proposal for a Super League and put forward some ideas on all of that. So I'd just be interested in your observations, if you like, but off the pitch stuff, but where fans are really interested in the game.
Yeah, firstly, I share your sentiments. I think it's great news we've got to the regulator. I supported it. I wanted it. I did worry whether, as a journalist, I should be sort of campaigning that maybe should be neutral. But I remember when it came around and Gary briefed a few journalists and some of us took different decisions. Some people felt they should just stay neutral. But I felt that it was a moment in time where you could maybe make a little bit of difference and difference for future generations. And I also felt that I think it is important people can trust journalists. I mean, I know they are the least trusted people in society. It is important that you know they're going to be neutral, but equally with social media, things were changing a bit. And, you kind of want to know what people think. And I thought, actually, I really believe in this. I don't think it'll be a panacea, like you said. I think the danger is we now think, all football's troubles are solved. And I know the regulators' opponents and the Premier League are working very hard to dilute it down behind the scenes. That there's plenty of journalists who are against it. And they regularly raise that kind of, you think it will solve all the problems of football. Of course it won't. And no regulator does that. And there are bad regulators out there. You've only got to look at your water companies. But I always thought that was a very weak argument, going, look at the water regulator. It's really weak. So therefore, we shouldn't have regulators. Well, the counter argument to that is make the regulator good, not that we don't need any regulation. So it's a bit of a stupid argument in my book. I think it is good. I think we've got to have realistic expectations, but hopefully with like you, Tim, and people chipping away at government. There's skim reading it, and I haven't looked at detail. There are some real powers in there, and you can get a criminal record if you breach some of the stuff the regulator asks you to do. So I don't think anyone believed we'd be here 5 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's exciting times. And just briefly, I mean, were you deliberately on the ground in Paris in the sense that you heard there was trouble and you went out to see what was happening? Or was it that you could not get into the stadium like everybody else and so became a kind of participant and a reporter of UEFA failing to stage the final well in Paris?
I'm a little bit more laid back than my colleagues, some of whom get there 5 hours beforehand, and I can't be doing that. So I think I was aiming to get there a couple of hours beforehand, which is, in reporters' term, it's quite tight. But in, obviously a fan's term, 2 hours for a game, you'd think normally, even a big game like Champions League, be plenty of time. So I ended up getting caught up in it. And I realised it was pretty bad straight away, pretty much, or rather as we got into the ground. And although I wasn't at Hillsborough, I remember as a teenager or early 20s reading the report and the Lord Justice Taylor report, and it was immediately triggering my mind. This is very Hillsborough-like. And obviously a lot of Liverpool fans of my generation would have felt the same. They would either have been there, they're very familiar with the tragedy. And yeah, I was trying to, I couldn't get any coverage, but I was trying to ring the people we know in UEFA to say, frankly, excuse my French, this is a shit show. You need to sort this out. I was trying to speak to the police to say this is really dangerous, but no one was listening. And the crush just grew and grew and grew. Then they ended up, essentially what you got was a terrible crowd management situation, which was then exacerbated by a local riot that was going on, which the police fired tear gas into. And so it was probably the worst thing I've seen at a football match. I'm quite surprised. And I think we're fortunate that we came away without any fatalities. Once I'd done a big investigative report a week later, so you put all your energy into writing that, and we were collating stuff and connecting with people on social media, and it was quite a lot of work, and I was quite emotional about it and saying to the paper, we've got to cover this, it's really important. And at the end of it, on a Sunday morning, or I think it was, I felt quite drained and a little bit shaky that actually we're in the midst of something really serious there. And I don't think it's improved at all. I think what City fans experienced in Istanbul was not quite as bad, but that's just through luck rather than judgment. They don't seem to have implemented all the recommendations of the review. Well, sorry, hardly any of the recommendations of the review. the trouble City fans got into was specifically because of this point has been missed by most of the media. The reason why City fans couldn't get into the ground and they were queuing in massive traffic jams was specifically because of information UEFA gave them and directions they gave them. So it wasn't like, oh, the local police are a bit chaotic, it's Turkey. It was like, no, it's you, UEFA. You told them all to go to one bus stop. That was never going to work. You again created a crush. So that's kind of my thing now, is trying to raise awareness of that. I think it will be better at Wembley, obviously, although we've had our problems there. I think they were specific to COVID. I think obviously it'd be better at Wembley, but I still have a huge concern about UEFA and they're hosting the finals.
Yeah, well, that's a problem we hope to have in a couple of months' time, and we might come back to that as we talk to you. Let's go on to the main subject, which is in effect is Mikel Arteta and where Arsenal are now. But first of all, Rob, tell us a bit. You were once based in Barcelona as a reporter. I think you're fluent in Spanish. You've got. I've known you a long time, and I've always known your knowledge of and interest in the Spanish game almost predates the arrival, not so much of Arteta, but the arrival of Guardiola and Emery and many others. I think, is there 7 or 8 Spaniards currently managing in English football? But give us your background and give us kind of why you have a particular interest and expertise at looking at a Spanish invasion of English football, if you like.
Just for any Spanish speakers, I would hesitate to say fluent, but I can interview and get by in Spanish. But I'd never quite describe myself as fluent. But I did try hard to learn out there. We worked hard, my wife and I. And my son was born out there, so we have an emotional attachment to the city. I went there for a couple of years, and I went there partly because I thought it would be really interesting to work. I mean, I thought it'd be fun to live in Barcelona, frankly, and to work abroad. And I could see that the landscape was opening up, so that it was essentially what I said to my bosses was, look, it's more important I know about Barcelona and Real Madrid transfer plans than, no disrespect, Nottingham Forest or who were mid-table at the time. I don't know, Stoke perhaps, because those were the big stories and big deals. And it struck me that it was obvious the game was going this way. And obviously that was true. I think I always had a romantic idea about Barcelona, listening to crackly radio, what was Radio 2 then, which now is Radio 5, sort of reports from, probably Tottenham. I think it's a Tottenham. Tottenham went there in the early 80s, but it just seemed like such a romantic place in this huge stadium, the Catalan independence thing, and no adverts on the shirts in the 80s. And, I was a sucker for all of that. And obviously when you get there, you realise it's not quite as romantic as, the club that currently is being investigated for refereeing bribery allegations, brackets, which they deny, close brackets. It's not quite as romantic as you've seen, but the idea of Barcelona is romantic, and it was a, really instructive time. I got to know a lot of people, and Pep wasn't around. Pep had retired, but he came to coach the B team in the second year I was there, and that was quite interesting. I didn't actually go. I should have gone and watched the B team a bit more clearly. And yeah, heads up, there might be a podcast on this being released in a few weeks, because we've done an episode. We're launching a podcast soon, and we've done an episode on Pep's year in the Barcelona B team. But that's quite interesting. I've spoken to a lot of people about that, and he was just a coming man. But I do remember having a lunch with a journalist from Mundo Deportivo in about March, the year before he was appointed, and it was clear Rijkaard was going. So this was 2007, I think, from memory, 2008. March 2008, it was clear Rijkaard was going, and I said, who are they going to give it to? And he said, I think they're going to give it to Guardiola. And we both were going, that's just madness. That's just emotional doping, club hero. What does he know about coaching? He's done the B team, but that doesn't mean anything. That's going to end in disaster. So those are my credentials as a predictor of coaching success right there.
And tell me, when you interview or try and work with a Guardiola or an Arteta or the other Spanish managers, does your background have any role at all? Will you try and use you've now talking down your pidgin Spanish?
I think it's better than pidgin, but no, I've never spoken to them. I was interviewing Rafa Benitez the other week in Vigo, just before he got sacked, and he did make me speak a bit Spanish, and I now know what Steven Gerrard feels like when he's been, when he came off after the FA Cup final and scored the winning goal in the last minute and told that he wasn't tracking back enough. Rafa was giving me the sort of like, no, you're pronouncing this word wrong and you've got bad English accent. I'm going, flipping heck, I'm trying here, Rafa. But no, not really, because to be frank, Mikel's English would always be much better than mine. But I have used it. I think the depth of knowledge. So in the piece that I've written, a couple of those questions I threw to Mikel at press conferences. I find press conferences quite boring and it's all injury news and looking for a line and you're always trying to write something more interesting. So I threw on him the fact that, I said, do you remember your Barca debut? Of course he remembers his Barca debut, but do you remember who you came on for? And he, in the piece I've written about how he comes on for Pep Guardiola, which I think there's a lovely symmetry there, particularly if Arsenal win the league, the sort of handing over of, sort of, I don't know, roles or being the heir of Johan Cruyff. And so you can get it. And you do see his eyes light up a bit. And similarly with Pep, I asked him about his time in the B team. And when we do this podcast, which hopefully we will launch soon, we've called it the day that Pep doubted passing football, because I asked Pep, look, you went into the B team and the Barca B team at that stage were playing in what is basically Northern Premier League. They were right low ebb. And they play in the football pyramid, obviously unlike our reserve teams, but they play on rutted pitches or artificial pitches. And I said, did you really in the B team always believe in passing football? And he said, no, there was after the first game, which I think they lose 3-1 or something, he kind of went home and thought, we can't play passing football on these pitches against these teams. You can imagine what a amateur, well, they're not amateur, they're semi-pro, but you can imagine what a 7th tier Spanish Catalan side is like in the mountain village. It's a bit like playing Warrington or something. And he had 2 days of doubt, he said, and then he came back on a Wednesday and said, no, we're going to stick with passing out from the back. And so I think sometimes you can get a more interesting story than just saying like, what do you think about Jose Mourinho type line?
Because I wondered also, do you have not sources? Well, I'm sure you do have sources in Spain, but almost following their media, their local media, gives you a bit more insight. And is Mikel Arteta kind of reporting back through 1 or 2 journalists he'll know because of that connection? If I use examples, we're good friends at the AST with Philippe Auclair and Julien Laurent, who obviously being French, and there was that affinity to Arsene and some of the players that just gave them a sense maybe that they had a little bit more access or a little bit more knowledge.
Yeah, I think so. I think Mikel's been in England so long, he's probably knows he's more anglicised. But I do find reading local media, and I try and do it. I don't do it every day, but I try and do it regularly and most days. So reading Mundo Deportivo, Sport in Barcelona, Marca and AS, just keeping abreast of it. I mean, that was really one of the reasons why I wanted to have that string to my bow, as it were, and I can read Spanish competent, I can pick up a paper and read. And so that's really useful. I mean, that's always been useful back in the old days when when there's no internet and you could pick up a copy of L'Equipe and on a newsstand in London, that would always give you extra insight to a transfer story. So obviously other journalists are a really good source of information.
When I looked at your piece, the bit that really struck me was it was actually not so much the Barca link, but the Basque link and the cultural identity kind of to the club there, and how you feel that there are elements of that understanding of how fandom works that Arteta is trying to create at the Emirates, where we certainly notice as a fan base and that a total step change in atmosphere. And partly that comes, of course, because you're winning again and playing better football. But there is a clear drive from the manager himself. You can see it in the pre-match conferences, in how he's cajoling the club for flags, for certain songs before games. There's an energy and a passion there, but articulate that a bit more as you see it and where it takes us back to Mikel's upbringing and football culture.
We've put a link on that article, and I'd encourage you to go deeper and read Sid Lowe's piece on ESPN, because Sid, who works for The Guardian and is based in Madrid, knows Basque culture probably better than any British culture. And I'm not an expert on Basque culture, but obviously I know, because I lived in Catalonia, but I know a little bit, and I do follow Spanish politics. And I found Mikel initially quite I wouldn't have said he was an emotional man. I would have said he's quite hard, and I wouldn't have thought he got all that fan stuff other than players always superficially get it. Oh yeah, we did it for the fans, let's go again type thing. But actually, dwelling on it and thinking of it and seeing what he's done, and particularly, that I know it's a silly thing, but playing with the Angel, I think that really, because what did you used to play, that Pet Shop Boy or Elvis song or whatever it was? That to me was, and I don't know if anyone liked that, but whenever I went, I felt that was the ultimate plastic Arsenal moment, because it just felt like this is a fan. This is a choice that's been imposed by the board on the fact, it just didn't feel authentic at all. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Please correct me if it was a genuine song. It just felt like very American, very kind of, hey, let's all sing this song. Whereas the Angel, I mean, obviously it's come from the top as well, but it just feels more, no, this is more from the roots down. And I thought it was interesting watching the Prime documentary, the Amazon Prime documentary, that Mikel clearly got that. And this started before Arsenal got good again, really, didn't it? I know they were better that season, but, this was before, really, it's been the last 18 months where Arsenal have been good. So the atmosphere has got loads better because the games are better and the players are better and the results are better. But I think it was building before. And I think it must be down to his Basque roots, because although he's not a big one for talking about Basque independence, or Pep's quite Catalanista, as they say. Pep will always talk up Catalan politics and has stood, I think, as a symbolic candidate for a Catalan independence party. Clearly the Basque country has all of that kind of independence going on, and in some ways more so because they had a violent terrorist group in ETA fighting for independence, much like the IRA, had a lot of links with the IRA, and that's only recently been disbanded. And they still have, a bit like Sinn Féin, there's still politicians in the Basque Parliament and Spanish Parliament who had links to those, and that's very controversial, in the same way that having Sinn Féin in government is controversial for many people. So I think he gets what identity means. Real Sociedad is a club, and Athletic Bilbao, the clubs in the Basque Country, are absolutely get what their identity means, what it means to fans. And I think maybe Mikel, cynically, it's wrong word, but kind of in a utilitarian sense, thinks that can give us something, that can give us a few points to see. I think he sees it as part of his job in a way that I don't think Wenger ever did, or other managers wouldn't. He thinks, actually, I can use this. I want to generate this, and I have to be the guy to lead it. If I don't lead it, it's not going to come from Vinay or, Tim or, it's not, maybe a club like Liverpool is an established fan movement. I don't know, but I think he felt, I've always felt since you moved to the Emirates, you'd lost something. I've been to the old Highbury. I've stood on the, on the terraces at Highbury.
When he, Rob, I know that when he was first appointed and they did the classic kind of walk around the offices, meet the staff, but he really got stuck into that from a point of view that he should know these people. But his main challenge to them, or question to them from day one, was, how do we work together to make the Emirates a fortress?
Yeah. So I think he was conscious that it wasn't a fortress, wasn't he? I mean, the implication there is that, I mean, I made a joke in the piece about the library, but it wasn't a good. I remember the Barcelona game when you beat Barcelona. Was that the Jack Wilshere played really? That was a good night. There are some nights I do remember, but I don't think it's ever been anything like Highbury. I don't. You guys would know better. But...
I'm just going to come in there. I mean, we talked obviously about sort of when he came in and what he did, but when he came in, Arsenal were in a very different place. They finished eighth. They were out of the Champions League. I think he said it himself. There was a reconnection there that was needed between sort of the fan base and things. Yeah. How do you think he sort of went about that? And also at the time, in the press, what was the general view on Mikel Arteta? Because he hadn't managed ever. It was a massive job. You're essentially replacing Arsene Wenger. I know Unai Emery was in there for a bit, but you're essentially replacing Arsene Wenger with someone who's never managed before. What was the view of the mainstream media? But then what was your view? Did it differ?
Yeah, not really. And remember, he had a terrible inheritance if he walked straight into COVID, didn't he? Which,
Yeah.
I mean, was just a disastrous situation to manage in. And he's a young manager, to take all that on was extraordinary. I remember being appointed, and it was one of those where you think, well, yeah, sure, you'd imagine Mikel would be a really good coach, and he'd done the whole thing at Man City, so he's sort of mini me with Pep, isn't he? But forgive me, I'm a QPR supporter, and we once transitioned from Jerry Francis pretty quickly to Ray Wilkins. The late lovely Ray Wilkins was a beautiful player, always spoke intelligently about the game. You thought, this man's just born to be a coach. So I've always been a bit suspicious of those. They might look like coaches, and honestly, and I'm sure I'm with plenty of you here, that the first couple of years I wasn't having him really. I mean, I remember going to the Bournemouth game where he started. That was, I feel like it was Boxing Day, wasn't it? But it was certainly around Christmas.
It was Boxing Day.
It's hard to draw much from one game, but we did the whole kind of Q&A with him, like, oh, what can you do? I think he spoke about, we've got to reconnect, we've got to revive. He did, see, he had his messaging right. But I thought, from a coaching point of view, he was, this is really damning a poor man's Eddie Howe. You know how Eddie Howe's team, when they used to try and play, they're a bit more direct now at Newcastle, but Bournemouth, they were pretty, but they'd always get tonked 5-0 by City. And then Pep would come out and say, like, oh, so much respect for Eddie Howe. He plays beautiful. I'm going, yeah, I bet you do, mate. You just tonked them 5-0. And we were laughing about it in press conference, like, oh, Pep would be, as the 6th goal went in, we again, Pep again, so much respect for Eddie, the way he plays. And Arteta, they just seem really fragile, the team. Now, maybe that's the squad and the players. He inherited a lot of problems, but I couldn't honestly see what he was doing. And that El Sacchio derby with Chelsea, when was that? That was again about run up to Christmas, wasn't it? When you were going in, and I probably spoke to you, Tim, at the time, and I couldn't really see where this was going. So fair play to his resilience. And I tell you what, though, I did think, and I think I would have said at the time, he clearly is a young, talented coach, but he's out of his depth, because I thought the way he went about City in the FA Cup semi-final in the COVID year when you went, and I think you won with 30% possession in that game. I thought, look, Solskjaer engineered some great counter-attack wings against City. So I'm not saying it doesn't put you in a pantheon of great managers, but I thought he's clearly good. You don't get one over on Pep that easily. And similarly in the final, they were really good tactically. So you're thinking, yeah, it's not that he's without talent, and maybe he'll come again. But I did think it was the end of the road and he was out of his depth. So it's been a surprise to me, because I generally think they are playing, I won't say the best football, because some of Wenger's teams, but I mean, it's clearly amongst the best football in Europe, but then maybe the best 3 teams in Europe are playing in the Premier League.
Were you surprised also at how he dealt with the big personalities? Now, Unai Emery tried to deal with Mesut Ozil, ultimately failed, brought him back in. Mikel Arteta gave him a chance, wasn't having him, he wasn't back in. Aubameyang, the same. Were you quite surprised at how strong he was? I suppose he had to be backed by the club, but
there's a phrase we use in the piece, which I'm not going to say, but he's very steely. But there's a friend of his who called him a steely so and so, and he meant it as a compliment. That he's and yeah, I think actually you see that. I don't think I put it in the piece, but I researched it. Remember that when he signed for Arsenal, basically Arsenal were a bit of a shambles then, weren't they? And they were trying to do that deadline day supermarket sweep to get all the players in. And basically Everton said no, Bill Kenwright said no way, Arteta was his favourite player. And Mikel marched up to David Moyes' office and said, I'm going, you got it. So he's got that about him. This is a kid who left home at 15 to go to boarding school, who went to PSG on loan when he failed at Barcelona, went to Glasgow Rangers, as I say in the piece, took a last-minute penalty at the age of 20 and took it off Ronald de Boer and Barry Ferguson. So I'll be taking this. So he has got that about him. No, I hadn't appreciated that about him as a player. I hadn't seen that in him. But the Aubameyang moment was massive. Of course, it could have gone. I'm always fascinated by sliding doors moments. What if, everything had gone downhill from there? Everyone would be saying, oh, he's such an idiot. Aubameyang was a key player at the time, despite his poor behaviour. So it could have been seen as you've really messed this up for us, Mikel. But I think the players, again, the little bits you get from the Prime documentary, it's very edited, isn't it? but that little exchange between was it Rob Holding and El Neni going, oh, they're in the canteen, aren't they? Going, oh, so he got rid of Aubameyang and then did he boss us balls? I think that's real. I think that's authentic. I think players see that and go, oh, yeah, okay.
And I mean, have you seen any sort of differences? But I mean, obviously, him and Pep are people compare them and stuff like that. And even other Spanish kind of, there's a lot of talk about sort of Xabi Alonso and Unai Emery because they're all from the same area. But have you noticed any difference in kind of coaching styles, coaching staff, and personnel as well? Because there's a lot of the Arsenal coaching staff get quite a bit of publicity now. You've got Albert with the pods, you've got Carlos, who's very young.
Yeah.
It's quite unique, whereas previously we probably wouldn't have known much about our coaches.
And,
yeah,
and he had to build that team individually rather than the big managers arrive with an entourage.
Yeah, I was about to say that's the interesting thing about Arteta is he is drawing on different. It's not like he's just brought lots of Pep clones with him. I know there's Spaniards in there and all the rest of it. So I think that all the Spanish coaches, essentially, we talk about them being Spanish, and of course they are. But I think, and Basque, and there's huge proliferation of that's in Sid Lowe's piece of the Iriolo and Emery and Lopetegui and obviously Mikel and Xabi all coming from about 10-mile sort of radius is ridiculous. But I mentioned this in the piece. I think all those Basque coaches are massively influenced by Pep and Cruyff. So actually, Basque football traditionally was more close to English football in being they call about La Roja Furia, which is like the sort of the Red Fury, which was Spanish style, but it was like a bit more long ball and a big centre forward, and so it's not the tippy tappy style. But I think the Spanish football was transformed by by Cruyff initially, but really by Pep's Barcelona. So Xabi. Arteta grew up on Cruyff's dream team, watching Pep play, and clearly when they were in their playing prime, Xabi and Arteta, they would have been massively influenced by what Pep and Barcelona were doing. So I think it has more Catalan roots in some ways than Basque, but clearly the Basque country being. I think one thing that's important about the Basque country and Catalonia, they see themselves as separate from Spain. So they like to think, and it is true to an extent, that they're more open to outsiders. So they're looking to other influences. So that's why Catalonia was very open to Johan Cruyff bringing a total Dutch style into Catalonia, because they wouldn't have felt any affinity like, oh, we've got to play Spanish, because that would have been anathema to them. They'd much rather speak to you in English than Spanish in Catalonia. They don't want to speak Spanish. Sorry. Barcelona is a complicated place, and there's plenty of people who are not pro-Catalan independence because they're descendants of Spanish workers. But the Catalanistas would rather speak to you in English than in Spanish for obvious reasons, because they speak Catalan and they kind of like see themselves as we're much more European than those sort of backward Spaniards down there in the south. And I think that openness to new ideas that allowed Cruyff to kind of take over and colonize the football culture. And I think the Basques are very happy with that and happy with taking on Catalan ideas. Remember Athletic Bilbao playing red and white stripes because I think it's Sunderland because of ship workers and ports. And these are port cities, so they're open to ideas, open to foreign sort of influences more than Madrid, say, would be. And so I think all of that is significant. But I do think that the style and the influences, if you're looking from Iriolo to Xabi to Pep, it's Catalan. But there were, and I could just sit here and discuss similarities. There are clearly differences. And I think Xabi will play without possession. Xabi's played in Carlo teams and Jose Mourinho teams. He's quite good from what I've seen of Leverkusen playing without possession as well. But they all are drinking from the same well.
And what's the relationship, Rob, between Arteta and Pep? I know they're obviously fighting it out for titles now, but are they boyhood friends and there's a strong link there? Was it just professional development that wanted City to be stronger and thought you were a good coach? Will they be, after games, will they be spending half an hour together, kind of in a friendly embrace and discussion? I think we're all fascinated to know what that relationship is. And will it come under strain if Arteta kind of knocks him off his perch?
I think it's I say it's already come under strain. I don't mean that they're at daggers drawn, but I just think that it's changed because I'm trying to think of analogies. I don't want to bring politics into it because it puts people's backs up. But I always thought David Cameron was slightly offended when, say, Michael Gove stood for leadership, because David Cameron always, it may not be true, but just looking at it, you think, well, I'm the old Etonian who runs things and you're just a state school kid. You don't get to be leader. And obviously Michael Gove never did become leader, but, or you could say with Boris Johnson as maybe a better example, right? I'm the sensible old Etonian. You're the idiot. You don't get to be leader. And I'm not saying we consciously Pep would think that, but I think there must be an element of master and apprentice. Remember when Mikel's at Barcelona, he comes on in that friendly game, he's 17 and I think Pep's 27, 28. So they weren't boyhood friends like he was with Xavi. He they are boyhood friends, they're the same generation, but it's more like a kind of senior player you can't really talk to and you look up to, but you're looking for a bit of advice. And then Pep obviously minds Mikel for information when he's Barcelona manager, when he plays English sides. So he's quite assiduous at working his contacts. And he'll ring up Mikel and say, he must have been playing Chelsea at the time, mustn't he? How did Chelsea play? What do you notice about them? So he's good at that. And I think clearly when they're at City, if you read Marty Perronau's book on City, clearly they were very close when he was at City, but that's because you're working together, isn't it? I think they have, their lives are entwined together since that moment that Mikel comes on for Pep against Hertha Berlin when I think 1999, I think I wrote in a piece. Their lives have had this curious sort of symmetry about them, synchronicity about them. The strands are weaving together, and which is a bit weird. You don't think this moment sort of 30 years ago, you're still going to be knocking around each other, but the relationship must have changed. And I think if Mikel does put Pep in his place, I think that's going to. Pep took it badly when Tito Villanova took over from him. It didn't, from what people say, he was expecting Tito to come with him, and he didn't like, he's younger then, less mature. Maybe he's, a bit more mature in his 50s, Pep. But I just think it's human nature. It would be difficult to be best mates.
Is it a case though, because Pep is slightly, I don't know, kind of not worried or anything about Arteta, but he's obviously being challenged by Arteta now. Is it a case of actually it is going to be maybe a couple of years where this relationship, but then in 5 years' time, it will change again. A little bit like you said, Pep Guardiola's all about Eddie Howe, great football. If Eddie Howe suddenly got Newcastle challenging for the title, suddenly I'm not sure Pep would be saying great football Eddie Howe, because it would, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I don't think it's ever going to get to Fergie Wenger levels, is it? Or Jose Pep. I mean, Pep's pretty. The thing that really irks Jose about Pep Guardiola is that everyone, certainly in early days, because of the beautiful football and everyone loved Barca, that he was portrayed as an angel and Jose was portrayed as a devil. And Jose knows better. He does know Pep from right back when Pep was in it. Obviously Jose was there coaching in the 90s and with Bobby Robson. And that's never been the case. Pep's always been a lot more nuanced and interesting than this angel person. But he does actually he's pretty good. He's a bad loser, like all managers are, and he can be a bit of an idiot at times. But he's kept a pretty good relationship with Klopp, hasn't he? In a period in which they've been really intense, in a way that Fergie and Wenger could never manage. And it was only Jose who really got under Pep's skin, I think. And so I think it will just be a cooling of it'll just be like a necessary cooling or necessary distance. And I agree. I think when they're sort of in their 60s and enjoying a glass of wine in Barcelona city centre, they'll have a little joke about how Pep got one over on Mikel last year at the Etihad and how Mikel eventually knocked him off his perch type thing. But I just think it's really hard to have that kind of friendship when you're being so competitive. You're spending every working hour trying to knock the other one off their perch.
And of course, that battle resumes on the 31st of March.
I'm more excited for that. I'm so excited for that game because I just thought it was such a fascinating game last season, even though Arsenal did badly in it. And then it was important that Arsenal won the return this year. at the Emirates, and yeah, I'm really, really excited for it.
What do you think? You're right about that, but you talk about the game last year. You think, I mean, Arteta got it wrong, but you also think that he's really learnt from it, and that's why they're where we are now, competing.
Yeah, I mean, a test whether he's really learnt will be next Sunday, won't it? Sunday week. But yeah, you're always learning. I think he obviously took I think Arteta took the manner of the title defeat last season really badly, because it was, I think Gary Neville put it well, where in the past we would have said bottled it, and I don't think we use that language now. What we'd more say is high performance sport is performing under pressure, and under pressure Arsenal didn't perform. And I think that was really disappointing for him. And I think that's why, you saw the quite ruthless changes he made, which to some extent, particularly in Ramsdale's case, I think to superficial observers, you'd have gone, well, what's the point of that? But I think he was just going, I'm not having no excuses this year. I mean, still clearly areas where they could improve, but equally he did what he could with the transfer budget, in the summer, to say we'll eliminate any excuses and any weaknesses as far as we can. And I'm anticipating that he's learned. I'm anticipating. I just think that Thomas Partey was a key. I never really trust him. I don't think Arteta really trusts him as a holding midfielder, and he's been injured so long this season. It's been difficult. So maybe that, if Partey been fit, I might be wrong, and maybe Partey starts on Sunday week. But I think Jorginho gives you a lot more control. Of course, you're at risk because he hasn't got pace, But Jorginho is a much more a Pep-like holding midfielder. I control the game. We're going to pass out the back. He's a much level-headed, more cerebral player. And I don't think he would have lost his head in a way that Partey did. That said, what Pep did was quite brilliant in the first 20, 30 minutes against Arsenal. So it's a bit harsh on Partey, because a lot of us would. And you could argue he's looking to his coach for some help from the side, going, because they did this, I wrote about it in the piece, they did this thing where Haaland dropped really deep, and De Bruyne was effectively playing centre forward, and suddenly Holding and Partey were like, oh, who are we marking? And once you've gotten to teams' head like that, you can really pull them apart, which we did. Now, you could argue, actually, Arteta should have been able to correct that. But you never know how much communication he had, how much would players listen. It's very hard to pinpoint who's at fault there. Should the players pick it up? Maybe the coach is telling them. But, yeah, I think that, I mean, look, Arsenal, the football Arsenal playing this season is extraordinary. When have they played? When's the last time they played football as good as this? What we're looking at, sort of 2003,
4 or 5,
yeah. I mean, and that's a pretty high bar.
Yeah.
Get over,
Yeah, that was the best football we probably saw.
I mean, that was better than '98, wasn't it? That team's better than So you're looking at either the best Arsenal team, either the second best Arsenal team of all time, or possibly, well, we don't know about the 30s, because I assume none of your members watched them, but let's just say in living memory.
I mean, exactly. It's been a while since we're challenging for a Premier League and in a quarterfinal of a Champions League, and potentially feeling we can actually get through. I've got 2 questions. I'm just going to sort of disappear for a few minutes to leave Tim through it. One is from Mark Stewart, who's just gone back a little bit, and he said Arteta was overlooked for Emery the first time round for the Arsenal job. Can you give any insight into the reaction from Arteta? And then my second follow-up sort of question on something we were just talking about was, what sort of the view from outside on Arteta and Edu and how they work together and stuff like that? Some have compared them to an Arsene Wenger and David Dean type thing. Some have compared them to others. What's the view? So we'll do that. Insight on the job rejection first, and then Edu and Mikel.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to think. I can't remember what Arteta felt at the time. I don't remember getting a readout on that. But obviously, I think it kind of did him a favour in a sense, because he'd have been walking into a lot of the problems Emery walked into. It gave him another. Where was he at that? So was he already at City, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. So he gave him another sort of 18 months or so at City to just sort of get his head round what Pep was doing. And that essentially was a coaching seminar for him, wasn't it? And magpieing ideas. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's ambitious, so he would have been disappointed. He probably would have really relished the challenge. And I think at the time, I'm trying to remember what I wrote and who I predicted. I think we all thought they were going to go for it, and I think they were very close to going for it.
It was like a cast. We would almost said like it was like a casting vote, or almost that they changed their mind halfway through the summing up, and they changed it partly going back to what you said earlier on. They just went, "This guy's not experienced enough."
Yeah, and it's coming back to me now. Yeah, because I remember we were talking about it. I was talking to other sources, and there were people inside the club who were saying, like, I really think that I actually think they're going to gamble on Arteta. And it was a little bit like, as I said, when Barcelona went for Pep, and I was going, "Oh, that's mad." You know, you think that's madness, and it takes a lot of courage for Joan Laporta to do that. And maybe he lost 2 years, but I actually think.
It worked out for him, Rob. I really think it worked out for him. I always used to have this cheesy phrase. Like I said, you want to be the manager that replaces the manager that after Wenger. And the club had become very rotten in its governance and some of its decision making. And the
difference with Arsenal was it had become rotten in its governance, decision making. It's flabby. Arsene Wenger, sort of like everything was in his head and there was no structure. But you'd won however many FA Cups and you got to UEFA Cup final. So it didn't feel like it was I know for fans it was frustrating, but it looked like from the outside, they're possibly on their way back, or they're going. Whereas when Pep to go from Barcelona, I mean, different metrics. They got to Champions League semi-final that year, but that's kind of a bit par for the course for Barca. They were falling off the cliff. Rijkaard had clearly, so he was taking over something that was a bad inheritance, but there's a lot of room for improvement. I think with Arsenal, it was just like there was no infrastructure. But at Barca, there was plenty of infrastructure with Chiqui and Ferran Soriano. There was no infrastructure, there was no support. They didn't really know where they were going. They were trying to reinvent the club. Half the people that they employed them left within 2 years, absolutely it didn't fit. Sorry, the second question was about Arteta and I can't remember what the second question was.
Well, I want to
Arteta and Edu.
I do think, I don't think it was in the early days. I really think there was a period when I was getting vibes and I never wrote it. So I'll be careful how I speak it, because I don't feel like if I didn't write it, then I shouldn't really now go, "Oh yeah, I knew." But I was getting vibes that, I suppose that you would always, the way Arteta's form was going, you would be looking at other candidates, wouldn't you, in case you had to replace him. And I thought that was quite a strong vibe at the time. And I think there was quite a lot going on. So I'm really interested into how that trust has been built, because it does look really trust. And I got to say, Edu, I thought his job as technical director of Brazil was not a job that was technical director of a club. So I wasn't. Again, it looked a bit like, we'll get an old player in, and that will keep the fans up. I didn't really see the sense in that. But you've got to say hats off to him. The signings have been really good. He's got Arsenal back. I don't like the agent game, but you have to be in it. And he's got Arsenal back in with the big agents. I think early on you were making some signings that you were thinking, not sure why we're making these, but maybe. They've honed that process now, and it seems like Edu's got support, and they're really sharp in the transfer market. When they need to spend money, they spend money. And I think probably having those people to make the Kroenkes spend a bit more money has been key, because I never felt that with Ivan Casillas and Arsene, even Arsene, when you never felt that he was really banging on doors saying, "Give it." He was such a puritanical figure of like, I don't really want to spend the money. So I think you've got people saying, like Mikel said, "Come on, we've got to spend 100 million on Declan. We've got to get him." I think that's kind of made the difference.
Arsene famously said, I think he was asked if you're given 100 million, what would you do? And he said, "Give it back," or something like that.
I mean, it just was his nature. He'd much rather sign a player for 5 million, and there's a joy in that, isn't there? The Vieiras and the
but he maybe ended up almost so obsessed with the vision of doing it like that he lost sight of.
But in the end, they were going Sanchez, Ozil, which were big signings, and that lifted them into being an FA Cup winning team, didn't it? So. I mean, I have mixed feelings about Mesut, but I know he's a great darling of all of yours, and I love watching him.
Not everybody.
Mesut did lift you, and Sanchez, for all his, giving up at the end, they did lift you into becoming, cup-winning sides, which I'm not sure you'd have won those cups without those quality players.
Agreed.
So,
a couple of
Rob,
questions.
Go on, Akio, and then I'll
Do
come back.
you want to cover the questions? Shall I cover the, let me cover the questions and then you cover, because they're about Wenger and Arteta, so it kind of goes now. So Larry Shaw has said, would Rob agree that on occasions Mikel has demonstrated Arsenal's stubbornness? Do you think Arsenal have learned also how to manage games in Europe after the tough battle versus Porto? And then the other question, I'll just ask both, and then you can. The other question is from someone anonymous who has said, "Can you share any insight into the decision from the club to retitle Arteta's job from head coach to first team manager? Was there any rationale behind it, and what was it?"
Well, we'll come to that in a second. The European games, the Porto games, I'm not sure actually, because I think it's too tight to say you went through on a penalty shootout and therefore I thought Porto did a really good job on you. And let's compare. I don't know what the Porto wage bill is compared to Arsenal's, but it's probably a third. You know, they showed how to play against Arsenal. If you win a penalty shootout as well as they won it, and they clearly had worked on those penalties and they took them really well, it's not luck, but let's just say it was a very fine margin. So we could be sitting here saying, oh, we still haven't learned how to manage European games. So I think Bayern's a bigger test. I do think you're a better team than Bayern, but no, I don't think they're quite there yet. And sometimes it can take a few years. It's a really odd thing about clubs going in Europe in the Champions League. Even with, say, Man City in the early days under Pep, even though most of the players had played in Champions League football, it's like they look like sort of naive and like they'd never played. And it's almost like you need to play together as a team and go through a few experiences to get it. So, and I don't want to sort of rain on your parade, but maybe, it will take, sort of a knockout blow to build that resilience. You remember how many times was it Chelsea to finally get there in 2011? Was it? When did they win it? In Munich, whenever that was. So I think it can take a few games because it's a really hard tournament to win, isn't it? It's just really
an expectation. I mean, someone sort of quite close to the club setup told me they were incredible. You could sense the nervousness before the Porto game.
Yeah. And
Arteta's kind of whipping up the crowd. I do wonder if Munich, and if they get through the next time, might almost play into their hands a little bit, because they're almost the underdogs, or you could sense against Porto this hoodoo of not having got to the quarterfinals.
I do think you sense that, but it's a bit like covering England World Cup games. You think, like, oh, finally we've won a penalty shootout, and then you think, oh no, imagine if we cock it up in the quarters against Sweden. Oh, we've got to semi, but what if we didn't get to the final? It's like you get over one hurdle, and now it'd be like, oh, if we lose to Bayern, it's we've lost to Bayern again. They always knock us out, type thing. So you're just creating another. It is great. It's great you've got to the quarters, but now it'll be like, oh, that's all we do. Get to So. I think the stubbornness, he is. He's a steely little so and so. It's a phrase we use in the piece, and you could apply stubborn to that. Again, forcing the move from Everton to Arsenal, just forcing that over the line. I think because he's younger and at a younger stage of his career. I'm going to posit this, and I might have to row back on it in 5 years' time. I think he's a bit more open to discussion ideas than Arsene Wenger was. I'm not saying, Arsene Wenger is a great man and was a pleasure to cover at Arsenal and to spend all that time with him at press conferences. But, he was a pretty singular, and I think it became his flaw in the end that he wasn't listening to enough people. And I think at the moment, Arteta, we talked about his coaching staff, I think he has got quite a ride. Who's the boss, so I know what you mean by the stubbornness. There's no sort of brook in his authority. It's absolutely clear whose idea is going to be number one. But I think from what I see, he's open to a lot. Maybe that changes as you get into your 40s and 50s, and you go, actually, I know most things. So it'll be interesting to see. Well, there was another question in there, wasn't there, about the manager. I think it was, and Tim will have insight in this. I think it was very deliberate in that they'd had I forget who they all were.
It was tied into Raul Sanelli being asked.
Wow, wasn't it? Yeah.
And then needing to do a little bit of a restructure because they long said that they'd never have all the power in one person, going back to what you just said about Arsene Wenger had too much. But it was there. Cynics might have wondered if what they were trying to do was save a bit of wage bill during COVID.
No. Here's what I think, and go deep into Arsenal history. You can argue where it goes wrong wrong. I mean, he still had a good 10 years, but where it goes wrong for Wenger was when, and where the club completely messed up was losing David Dean, and probably most of you agree with that. And the thing was, yeah, they banged on about this. Oh, we can't have it all in one man with Arsene Wenger. Yeah, but when you were running most successfully, it wasn't all in one man. It was a lovely symmetry, a Lennon and McCartney type. They offset each other's personality perfectly, because David Dean does like spending money, and he would push Arsene to spend money, and he will have told you that, Tim. And I've had many conversations with him about that. And you know, so basically they created that problem by getting rid of David Dean, because there's no one else competent on the ball to fulfill that role. And so what they've reconstructed, and it is a bit Dean Wenger, isn't it? It's not just Arteta, but they did need Arteta in that mix. So Unai Emery would never have had the power to be in that mix, but Arteta, because he knows the club and because he's got more relationships and he's probably more forceful because he's better with the language, needs to be in that court, the Richard Garlick, which I imagine it's going to be a triumvirate, isn't it? It's going to be Garlick, and it's going to be Richard Garlick and Edu and Arteta probably making the main decisions, I would guess.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's not one man, So he needs to be for the club to move forward in a way that it'll be Chicky and Pep who discuss things, and Ferran Soriano. I think you do need that link. I mean, there are some models that work where, but Klopp has a lot of input.
It's too big these days, yeah. Rob. There's so much going on that you can't.
You can't be Alex Ferguson, but equally, I don't think you can just be the coach who's given a load of players to, and that does happen at some clubs, but that's not the most successful clubs.
And the work that's going on now, you'll probably, you do know, because you sometimes just phone me up and check a figure or what it was going on. I've got colleagues, Nigel and Simon, that do this amazing financial analysis of Arsenal's situation. In fact, they've just written another one that we'll put out looking at where they are this year. But we know from talking to Arsenal that the amount of work clubs are doing now, looking at each other's finances, looking at the PSR rules, working out who Chelsea might need to sell and getting in there early, that isn't something that Arteta can do. He might be in the chain saying, can you do the run? Can you run the runes over that guy? Or I fancy this player. But it's got to be a team of people now working out what an expanded Champions League might mean to squad size. So I think you're absolutely right that Arteta can set the tone, but it's got to be a team around him.
Well, it's like in tactics, and we did a piece on the amount of analysis they have. And I think it's still very much that coaching team who will do most of the work. But they've got loads of people. So you'll have, most clubs will have 10 or 15 people, and a lot of them sort of 20-something whiz kids going through games, clipping up pieces, going through all the stats, going through the videos. And so, when Pep first started doing this, and he really got it off Bielsa, who I think kind of pioneered this, Pep would literally be watching, in the early days at Barcelona, you'd see him in his office and he'd just be going through a game, spending 2 hours watching his opponents, trying to find a weakness in them. Now, I just don't think they've got time for that anymore. They've got all these whiz kids and computer programs that can do a lot of that for you. I think, I did speak to a manager about this, and they said, no, but you still have to watch the game. You still have to watch it back, and you have to watch a game. You can't compromise on that. But clearly you've also got 20 other people pulling out. This is what they do at corners. This is where they're a bit weak when they're defending. This is where they're a bit weak on the counter, and highlighting areas. Then you've got to take all that information and apply, use your Mikel Arteta brain to say, what are the 4 most important things of this I can communicate to players of these. But you've got, it really was just Pep and a video recorder 20 years ago, whereas now it's a whole team of computer scientists and data analysts.
Now I want to sort of swing the questions to we talked about Arteta forcing his way in from Everton. We've talked about Arteta coming from City, 1 interview, no, 2nd interview, yes. Does he do 20 plus years like Arsene Wenger? And what I particularly want to know is, what did Barcelona, is he viewed as one of their prodigies over there? Is that the threat to where he goes next? Or does he go back to City? Or that depend on the 115 charges and where does the City to go back to?
I think it's the Barca is a bit like the Freemasons, that you never leave. And I think they, you can see it in the manager to a point, and really Xavi didn't, he did well win La Liga last season, but he didn't really have the pedigree. And Luis Enrique won the treble, but, he didn't really have the pedigree to go manage. It's a different kind of system in Spain, whereby having a link, he knows the club, is really important, having that link. So, yeah, I would have said 18 months ago that Arteta does well at Arsenal. He's definitely the shoo-in for when Xavi goes. I just think the dynamics of how finances and, I mean, almost he's done too well at Arsenal to leave now, would be my guess, is that actually, why would you walk away from this now? And secondly, look at the financial mess Barcelona are in and the relative strength you're going to, presumably talk about in the next couple of weeks that Arsenal are in. You're looking at the European market. I'd rather be, and this is how things have changed in the last 5 years. I'd rather be Arsenal sporting director than Barcelona's. I'd rather be Arsenal coach, Arsenal manager, given my transfer list than Barcelona. Barcelona's are not quite shopping an Audi, but they're looking for the free transfers. They're looking for, who can George Mendes get them. Remember, Deku's now sporting director, who used to work for George Mendes' agency, another old boy being appointed. That's very controversial in Barcelona because basically, obviously, legally, this is not the case at all, I have to point out, but Barca socios, the loyal fans, kind of feel like they've outsourced their recruitment to George Mendes, and don't feel that's a good thing. So, I think he's I'd be really surprised if anyone stays for 20 years anymore. I do remember Gary Neville saying, we say there'll never be another Wenger and Ferguson, but we're seeing it with Pep at City. Because he is, how many years now? 8, 9? I mean,
he's got one more year to go after this.
Yeah. Well, let's say he signs another contract. He could easily have done 14 years. I mean, which in itself is extraordinary. I think he will. I just think it's unlikely anyone stays for. I think the Klopp scenario is more likely that he stays for 5 or 6 years, basically does a sabbatical thing, and then goes and manages Barca. Or Bayern Munich or one of the other super clubs. I hope he stays. I hope for your guys' sake that he stays. But I mean, I'd like to see the story develop. I don't feel we've reached an ending.
A question here from Stephen Pavilion on the issue of managers moving and where they go and where their links are. Are we going to see another Spanish arrival in Alonso into this triumvirate? And if so, is there any link there, or is it just a complete Spanish takeover of the top coaching positions?
Well, I think, it is a Spanish takeover. And one of the things we were discussing when we were working on the podcast I'm working on was, I think everything changes when Jose and Rafa come to England in 2004, off the top of my head. I think everything changes, and it's an Iberian takeover really at that stage. But what we're seeing now is, as I said, so that I think that was huge, and that's why everyone started looking for, got to get a Spanish coach, got to get a Portuguese coach. I think the Pep thing took it to another level, because Roberto Martinez was playing kind of Cruyff-style football with Wigan and Everton before Pep got here, but there was an element of like, well, yeah, it's okay, but you can't really play that in the Premier League, I think, when Pep came here. And I remember Leicester absolutely battering them in the first season Pep was here, and they didn't win a trophy, did they? And they were shambolic. They had slow fullbacks that season, and it just didn't work. And he didn't really have the players. And that was the famous press conference when Pep said, what about the tackles? Who cares about the tackles type thing? And we were all like, this isn't going to work, Pep. I thought you can't come to England and say we don't care about second balls. But yeah, it did. He got the player. He spent enough money. It's going to work, isn't it? So sorry, I've rather lost track of the question. But yes, I think that you're seeing a Spanish takeover. So that most of the jobs, if you're looking at a shortlist now, so when Arsene came, it was all like, let's get a French coach, wasn't it? So if you're looking at a shortlist now, you're a top club, you're looking who are the top Spanish. So their coaching culture is really deep. They really think carefully about it. Maybe one of Unai Emery's faults was he's too meticulous, but that's very much the Spanish way. I think that's influenced by Bielsa. I know he's Argentinian, but obviously in the Latin world, he has huge influence. Bielsa is the one who obsessively in the 80s and 90s is picking apart games, getting obscure videotapes, watching them, rewatching them, because he is slightly mad and got that obsessive tendency. And they all in a way that they will laugh about your classic. I'm not going to mention names on here, but the classic. Imagine a classic English coach, gruff, kind of like they'd be in their 60s now, but back in the day they might be managing a mid-table Premier League club. It'd be like team bonding nights out, and if you win on Saturday, you get 3 days off. And Benitez used to joke about them, and Benitez was just like, well, we've got to train. I mean, maybe he goes too far the other way, but we've got to train and coach. We've got corners to work on and set pieces. And the Spaniards have cornered the market, of course, Klopp and the Germans as well. So you've got two schools of thought, really. I think the Cruyff school of thought, which I think most of the Spanish coaches come under. There's a slight distinction between southern Spain and Catalonia, as we talked about earlier, and the German school, which is which I'd include obviously people like Tuchel in that Stuttgart school of German coaching. Ralph Hasenhüttl's just got a job, hasn't he, back in Germany again? And forgive me, it just escaped me. The Leeds man, Jesse Marsh, I know he's American, but he's from that Red Bull stable, very Ralph Rangnick influenced, Jurgen Klopp. They're very much peas in a pod. Similar meticulous approach, different styles, but meticulous approach. And I think if you're an executive at a Premier League club or or even a Championship club, and you want your manager to be working hard, that they don't like the sort of like hail fellow, well met British manager. If they're going for the British manager, going for the Eddie Howe, Graham Potter type, who fits more into those kind of models. And English coaching is having to reinvent itself because of what Spanish coaching and German coaching has done.
Got a question here from Tony Head, then I'll pick up one from Kevin Witcher after that, just to give you a breather for like a minute while I talk. But from Tony Head, he's asking, and I think you know, Rob, that a couple of weeks ago we had one of your former colleagues, Nick Harris, on, who has been the oracle of investigating Manchester City's 115 charges. But what I'm interested, given the way you watch City and your knowledge, is how Pep, I know he can get very tetchy in being pressed on this, but do you think he is committed to City in the sense that he will stay and see through a punishment and an appeal? Do you think it coincides with him being off? What will, in effect, is the question is, will Pep be leaving when the 150 charges culminates?
Firstly, I think it's the biggest question in not just English football, but European football, and you could argue world football, club football. Of the moment, what happens to Man City is the humdinger of all trials. It's either they get away with it or more or less get away with it, in which case you can rip up pretty much most regulation to a certain extent. And that's not quite true, but it will be seen as a huge, by some people, huge travesty. Or if they get punished with that amount of charges, they're getting punished big, and it's going to be. You'd imagine it will be something like relegation, and that will completely change the power dynamics of English football. It might be like a Juventus in Italy, whereby for a couple of years everyone's got a free hit to the title, and then they're back, as quickly. But I think it's harder for City to recover because they don't have as much depth and foundations as Juventus do. And so would Pep stay? If you believe romantic Pep, he's like, it would be great to see Pep in the Championship or League One, wouldn't it? And really, if he I kind of think Pep's done everything. Why not go managing League? It would be a great challenge. It would be fantastic to see him, managing at Rotherham or somewhere. But the kind of football person in me goes, that's the moment he goes off to Brazil to coach their national team or something. Because that's the thing, isn't it? That year's deal, the year left on his deal, is like that. They must have scheduled. We don't know when they've scheduled the start of this hearing, and it's going to be complicated. But they've surely got to get it pretty much sorted by the start or early on next season, so it's time for an appeal, so that it's actually sorted by the end of next season. So I'm guessing it's going to happen pretty soon and over the summer, and we'll get a verdict maybe in the autumn, and then.
Convenient or not, that overlaps with a Pep Guardiola contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So the football cynic in me says he'll be coaching Brazil when for the World Cup or something. But the romantic in me hopes that he's there at Millwall, sort of trying to set City up. Kevin De Bruyne is sort of playing holding midfield because his legs can't run anymore, and he's having to sort of deal with hard men, League One central midfielders.
Very quick question from Kevin Witcher is asking about Tim Lewis's role at the club. He heard he likes to get very involved. With Vinay departing, is he going to become the de facto CEO? Well, from my observation of the club, Kevin, and going to the advisory board and working around, yes, that's correct. Tim Lewis is now changed his title. It's executive vice chair. That keyword executive. He is there every day. You know, they've changed him onto the payroll as well, the big salary at the club. He is the link to the Cronkies. Arteta knows that if he wants a big signing to go through, the person you persuade at the club that the money should be spent is Tim Lewis. He attends all the Premier League meetings as Arsenal's representative, is getting more involved in other areas. I think in some ways, very different persona in terms of networking, charm, you know, sit down at dinner with and have a chat. David Dean, you could be with David Dean for hours and talk football, couldn't you? And enjoy the conviviality. Tim Lewis is a corporate lawyer and a different type of personality. But I think he's getting to the stage where he has as much influence on Arsenal as a David Dean did. Whether that's to the club's advantage in dealing with, for instance, Brighton on a transfer deal, or where the government decided to go on the regulator this week, might be a different debate. But yeah, absolutely very involved. To bring one or two back to you, Rob, Mark Stewart was asking about the George Graham comparisons and being as successful. You kind of gave one or two analogies there. I thought of another one, which I think in many ways the Porto game sealed the deal here, which is the ruthlessness of moving on Ramsdale for Raya. In many ways was George Graham with John Lukic to David Seaman. Yeah. John Lukic was a big fan favourite back then, and it wasn't a popular decision until people saw 6 months of what David Seaman could do. But what similarities do you see?
Yeah, but to be fair, that's Nigel Winterburn's observation. And I think when I spoke to Nigel, that was probably last season sometime. And he said, it really strikes me the way he dealt with Aubameyang and Ozil was, I think that's who Nigel was referring to, although he didn't name them, was very similar to the way George got rid of Graham Ricks and was Charlie. He got rid of Charlie. It was George who got rid of Charlie Nicholas, wasn't it? I think. Yeah. So, you know, there was that just change in tone. You know, when you watch Amy Lawrence's wonderful 89 film, when you watch George dressing the players, you kind of makes me scared now, and I'm 53, you know, and I'm watching it through a television screen. So yeah, I think there was the absolutely is that comparison. I was on the tube coming back from the Porto game, and I overheard a fan saying, "Oh, no, I was along the lines of like, oh, Ramsdale, you're dead to me." You know, it's like I loved Aaron, but you're dead to me now. David's the man, and yeah, I think it was hard to see. That actually I didn't put it on the link on there, but it's a very good TIFO link where they analysed Ramsdale's performance, and they did all the stats and everything, and show that he just did. I mean, we could see it in your eyes. He downturned when the pressure was on, and it's you know he's still a brilliant goalkeeper. He'd still do a great job for any most sides in the top 6 in the Premier League, but it's just not quite good enough. Now whether Raya, maybe Porto is the game that, I mean, Raya still makes errors and has made errors this season. And every time he makes one, you think, oh, have they got Ramsdale in? But, clearly Pep I think he thinks his distribution is better, and he thinks he's a better goalkeeper, doesn't he? And I think he thinks his mentality is better. And it is that performance, delivering under high pressure. And, I think Arteta saw a weakness he didn't like. Well, he did see a weakness, didn't he, in Ramsdale? He clearly, which he didn't like, which is hard because he's obviously a terrific fellow and he's a really nice guy. And he obviously felt very supported by Arteta until that moment.
There's one or two questions asking you to say who the centre forward should be next year and look at the structure. I don't know whether we should do that or whether we should actually worry about the next 6 weeks most. So tell you what, let's look at the next 6 weeks and then we'll
Osimhen on the centre forward.
Where it should go next. I'm going to do the really unfair question now, Rob, and get you to look at the next 6 weeks. How's it? It is a fantastic season to watch, and of course, it's edge of the seat for us. I'm sure for QPR fan, you can just say, "Wow, look at the quality of some of these games that are coming."
No, we've got a relegation battle to worry about.
Come on, put your head on the block. What is going to happen? Is Mikel going to overtake Pep, or is Jurgen going to go out with the most amazing of send-offs?
If I had the courage of my convictions and watching what I'm seeing on the pitch right now, I'd say Arsenal win the league.
Really?
but you knew there was a button. But and I'm always where the thing about predictions, and obviously we have to do them a lot. You're always obviously the sensible thing to say is City will win the league because City always win the league. And it's like, I suppose it's like calling the financial markets. It's like, it's right until it's wrong, isn't it? I mean, if I was being public, I'd probably say Man City win the league because they've got the know-how, they've got a coach, I don't think they're quite as good as last season actually, but they're good enough. And they're not going to buckle under pressure. And we don't know whether Arsenal will buckle under. We know that they're looking better, but we don't know whether they've learned that lesson. You kind of feel with Declan, I'd say the Jorginho thing's quite big. If he can, as long as he can keep going for the season. I think obviously they had the injuries at centre half last year as well, which was massive. Which they, let's say they don't get that. Let's say Raya is better than Ramsdale. So, so and of course Liverpool, the romance. It's not like a 2-horse race, is it? So. I think I should say Arsenal because I think what you're seeing on the pitch, and if you looked when Sky did that analysis before the Sheffield United game, and it just really brought home the defensive figures, that I don't know how many of you saw it, but Arsenal are just number one on all the metrics, expected goal difference, all of that kind of stuff, touches in the opposition half, touches that you allow teams to have in the opposition box. All of that suggests you're playing better than anyone at the moment. But then you could lose 3-0 on Sunday. That's a thing I'm wrestling with. But go and ask. It's not just because I'm with you. I just think if you take the emotion out of it, that Arsenal are actually playing best at the moment.
I don't know if you read Nick Harris's piece, Tim, today from the Sporting Intelligence, but he analysed the sort of next 10 games and Arsenal's 5 away games. The average position of their opponents is 6th. So 6th. The average position for Man City's opponents is like 10th.
Yeah.
And like 12th for Liverpool. Somehow it might be the other way around. Okay. But essentially, that means
I'm rowing back on what I just said.
Yeah, well, that essentially means we are playing 6 very, very good sides away from home, 5 very good sides away from home, which I think is the pressure, isn't it? It's that pressure word. It's I think because Arsenal can beat all 5 of those teams on their day. Well, City away will be tough, but they can. But can they do it under pressure? That's the
and the pressure we got coming, and there does seem to be a pattern at the moment, Rob. I don't listen to Arsenal aren't doing very well when they go back to back with big games.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the pressure, both physical intensity and mental agility, isn't it? And also, that's just plain facts that you've got more difficult games. So it's not like the run-ins are the same, are they? So there is less chance. So rowing back on myself, there's less chance that you'll win those games. That doesn't mean that you're crap or bottling it. It just means you're more likely to only win 4 out of 5 of those games, where City might win 5 out of 5.
And you throw into that, players that will not be experienced of doing Bayern Munich, and if they get through that one, going to Real Madrid or City, and that didn't Liverpool's title odds shorten when that draw came out?
I didn't see that, but absolutely. And I think a couple of people have mentioned it. He also maybe going out of Champions League would have helped, but I never quite buy that because I think the emotional buoyancy of you want to be a winning team, you want to be in competitions, you want to feel like we're invincible. So,
okay, we must try and let Rob finish and at 9:30. So that's 6 minutes. What can you sweep up from the questions or anything that you want to ask in our final few minutes?
I guess people are just sort of asking about sort of what's next for Arsenal. So regardless of from a squad perspective, regardless of if they sort of win the league or whatever, is it say, can you see another 100 million signing coming in, or can you see a little bit more? Because obviously with kind of financial regulations and stuff as well, we've got to kind of be a bit careful. How do you see outgoings going? Do you think they'll be very tempted to sell a homegrown player or two just to balance those books? What have you got your crystal ball about the summer? So I'm not saying who they're going to sign, just what will the strategy be?
The sad thing about financial regulation is that homegrown players are just so vulnerable now, aren't they? Yeah. And they're just like straight cash on the bottom line. And so, and you can see those kind of sales, which is a shame because you lose that connection. And I love not just, obviously not just a Paul Merson, but I don't know who would be a, Perry Groves or something. I love those players who just stick around a club for a long time and are good club men and aren't necessarily the best players in the team, but they give you some identity. And I it's a shame that those players tend to just are the ones that get sold now. So I can see that you guys may and Tim may know more about the figures than I do, but that clearly, though the Odegaard Kai Havertz thing works very well at the moment, you would want the option. Jesus is a good player, but you'd want the option to, if he's ruthless, he's going to want to upgrade. But he could clearly only do £100 million transfer last summer, and they made the right choice on that. So I know Napoli, the Italians say it's just so hard to get players out of a club from Napoli unless they've got a clause, because the owner of Napoli is just, it's just important, so Osimhen would be kind of the obvious one. He gives you pace, running in behind, great finishing, charismatic player. The crowd are going to love him. He's an emotional, instinctive player as well. But whether that's just too problematic, it depends on. There was a period in which he looked definitely he was going to leave, sort of in around about Christmas, and it's all settled down about since then. But that would seem to me to be the obvious fit if they could get him out and he'd convince him. But sure, I'm sure he would be happy to come. I mean, City aren't going to sign a centre forward, are they? And I don't see Liverpool sign a centre forward. So it's almost like you've not quite got first pick in a draft, but it's a little bit like pick your favourite centre forward in Europe and have a crack at them.
It is going to be an extraordinary window. I mean, we've seen the January one where nothing happened. As these PSR rules bite, clubs, no other clubs need to sell. Clubs are much more cautious about what they spend. I think it will look, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I think it's going to be strange. Arsenal fans tend to think that they're going to get far more for like Emil Smith-Rowe and others that we might want, and Tekia. I think they'll move for very low fees. So it will be interesting what happens.
But it was like watching a bunch of naughty school children where the head teachers finally cracked down on them in January, wasn't it? Everyone's now like, oh, I can't spend anything. Like, oh, they really are going to punish us.
They
spent years going like, no one cares about profit and sustainability. And the Romans, actually, I'll be careful what I say on camera, but Chelsea are being investigated for possible irregularities, which they deny.
Even Mikel Arteta didn't ask for any money in January, or knew he wasn't going to get any.
I mean, because they're just like going, "Oh, you mean it? There actually are points deductions. Yeah. Oh, we just thought we'd bluff our way out of it." You can see in the Premier League submissions, reading them, that the clubs clearly think we can just talk our way out of this.
Yeah. And another thing that people forget, we talked about him tonight, but Arsenal don't actually buy David Raya until June.
Yeah, so that's going to cost.
Well, they've already spent 30 million, which is a considerable chunk of, if you like, the free cash the business generates.
Yeah. So they need to really cover that 30 million in sales if they can. I mean, I don't know if they can go to 100 mil, but that's clearly what it takes to, that plus is what it takes to, get an Ivan Toney or Victor Osimhen is going to be in that kind of realm, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Have you got a last question, Aki, or something?
No, I think that was it. That summarised the last couple well. I think we're good.
Well, Rob, thank you so much. Really, so many questions were flying in there, and you have such insight, and particularly like your point. Or then you started to row back and saying that Arsenal will win the league. I don't know quite what it was, but
let's say Arsenal are going to win the league, and you can take this recording, and when you do it, you can, and if they don't do it, just destroy the recording.
But really, and anyone who's listening who hasn't read the article, it's there in a PDF in the newsletter. It opens up really nicely to read. It's really fascinating, and I think we're all it's becoming a little bit like Arsene Wenger, where for years any discussion about Arsene Wenger was almost more interesting than discussion about Arsenal. Maybe it's because they're one and the same, but it's becoming like that with Mikel Arteta, and you've really this evening expanded our knowledge, and I think introduced some of the interesting stuff from his background. So I really thank you for giving us time.
Just for because we send this out to a podcast as well, so there'll be people listening for days to come. So that article Tim talks about can be found, I think it's on our website, arsenaltrust.org. It's also been emailed to you. And just to be clear, it's an exclusive piece of writing for AST. It's not something taken from a newspaper or anything. Rob has actually written it the last few days for this session. So it's very, it's definitely worth a read. And, if you can spare 5 minutes, I think Rob deserves that after writing that for us. So thank you for that piece as well, Rob.
No worries. It was a pleasure to do, actually. And so thank you for inviting me today. And I've had great relationships with your organisation. Your leaders and you guys do a huge amount. And I think the more people, more fans can actually club together and support their trusts or their independent fan groups, the more power that we generally have. So, yeah, just to encourage everybody out there to keep going with it.
Perfect. Right. Well, I think that's a wrap. For everyone listening, thank you for listening, either if it was live or on the recording. Enjoy your next kind of few days watching England and all the other countries, and then we'll go to Man City and we'll see what happens. We'll be the top of the world on Easter Monday, or looking forward to Bayern Munich, if you know what I mean. So take it easy and up the Arsenal.